Yesterday, the national average price of gasoline hit $4.45 per gallon. That is the highest price ever recorded on May 2nd in the history of AAA tracking data. It is $1.28 more per gallon than Americans were paying 1 year ago today. Fox Business is reporting that analysts are now forecasting $5 per gallon gas by Memorial Day. And S&P Global, one of the largest energy research firms on Earth, just modeled 3 near-term price scenarios for American gasoline. And their director of refining and marketing, Rob Smith, said that even in the most optimistic of these scenarios, in which flows through the Strait of Hormuz recover quickly with no restrictions, U.S. retail gasoline prices are likely to face an uphill battle to return to pre-war levels until 2027. Not until fall, not until Christmas. Until 2027, that is the best case. And the best case assumes the strait opens immediately, which it has not. Which it shows no sign of doing. And which Iran is actively preventing by charging tolls of over $1 million per ship and mining the waterway with explosives that, according to at least one intelligence report, Iran itself has now lost track of. GasBuddy's head of petroleum analysis Patrick De Haan was asked how long it would take U.S. prices to reach pre-war levels if the strait opened fully and permanently right now, today, this minute. His answer was months. Veteran fuel analyst Tom Kloza, who currently advises Gulf Oil, said he does not believe prices will revert to pre-war levels this year, even if the strait is returned to normalcy in almost immediate fashion. Energy Secretary Chris Wright told CNN that gas might not drop all the way down to the pre-war level of just under $3 per gallon until next year. And the president contradicted his own energy secretary the next day by predicting faster drops, which tells you everything you need to know about who is operating from data and who is operating from hope. The data says $4.45 today, $5 by Memorial Day, $5 to $6 through the summer. And no return to $3 until 2027 at the earliest. That is the summer you are about to drive into. Inventories are plunging and every shock absorber America had is running dry before summer even starts. CNN reported 3 days ago something that should have stopped every American in their tracks. U.S. crude oil inventories unexpectedly plunged by 6.2 million barrels in a single week. Stockpiles of gasoline fell sharply, stockpiles of distillates like diesel fell sharply. And CNN's reporting quoted an energy analyst who said the excess supply buffers that have supported the market only have a few months left before they break. A few months. That puts the breaking point squarely in the middle of summer. The exact period when American gasoline demand hits its annual peak, because 280 million registered vehicles are on the road for vacation travel. Commuting in heat that requires air conditioning that reduces fuel economy. And running the daily errands of a country that has no functional public transportation, alternative to the private automobile in most of its geography. The United States consumes approximately 9 million barrels of gasoline per day during peak summer driving season. Roughly 400 barrels per day more than during winter. That additional demand is arriving into a market where inventories are already falling. Where the strategic petroleum reserve is at its lowest level since 1984. Where the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed. Where 230 loaded tankers are still sitting inside the Gulf. And where the 14 million barrel per day shortage created by the strait closure has not been replaced by production increases anywhere else on Earth. CNN's analysis documented that crude output in the United States, Latin America, and other regions has grown by historic levels, but cannot increase nearly enough to make up for the 14 million barrel per day shortfall. Saudi Arabia and the UAE, the two countries most capable of ramping up production, cannot dramatically increase exports because their main export route is through the strait that is closed. And global refineries that turn crude oil into gasoline are operating at or near maximum capacity already. Which means even the oil that is available cannot be refined fast enough to meet the demand that summer will create. The math, as CNN put it, does not math, and when inventories hit zero, the price does not rise incrementally. It spikes. Because the market transitions from a pricing mechanism based on supply and demand into a rationing mechanism, where the price rises, until enough people stop buying that the remaining supply can serve those who are willing or able to pay whatever the market demands. Summer blend gasoline costs more to produce, and the switchover hits right as everything else is breaking. Every year between April and June, American refineries are required by the EPA to switch from producing winter blend gasoline to summer blend gasoline. Summer blend fuel uses a different formulation with pricier additives designed to reduce evaporation in warmer temperatures. The switchover reduces tailpipe emissions and ground-level ozone, which is why the EPA mandates it. But it also costs more to produce, takes longer to refine, yields fewer gallons per barrel of crude, and reduces the total gasoline output of the American refining system during the exact weeks when demand is accelerating. AIA noted in late February, before the war even started, that refineries were beginning the process of producing summer blend gasoline, which contains pricier additives to help reduce evaporation during warmer months. And that gas demand was expected to increase as spring break season kicked off. That was the baseline expectation before a single bomb fell on Iran. Now layer the war on top of that baseline. The summer blend switchover is happening right now, in May, reducing refinery output and increasing per-gallon production costs, while simultaneously the Strait closure is reducing crude oil supply. The IEA strategic release is depleting emergency reserves. Inventories are plunging at 6.2 million barrels per week, and 280 million vehicles are about to hit the road for the summer driving season. BP's 440,000 barrel per day refinery in Whiting, Indiana, just experienced a brief power outage that shut down one of its processing units. And GasBuddy's Patrick De Haan warned that refinery issues and scheduled maintenance in the Great Lakes region are expected to keep prices elevated for consumers in the Midwest. That is one refinery in one region causing price elevation in an entire section of the country. The American refining system has zero slack. No new greenfield refinery has been built in the United States since 1977. Refinery capacity has been declining as older facilities close and are not replaced. And the remaining refineries are running at 90% or higher utilization rates, which means a single unplanned outage at a single major facility can disrupt regional supply for weeks. The summer of 2026 is arriving at the worst possible intersection of reduced refinery output from the summer blend switchover, reduced crude supply from the Hormuz closure, reduced strategic reserves from the IEA release, reduced inventories from the plunge documented by the EIA, increased demand from the driving season, and reduced system resilience from decades of refinery consolidation and underinvestment. Every variable is pointed in the wrong direction at the same time. 14 million barrels per day are missing from global supply, and nobody on Earth can replace them. CNN's reporting on the oil market published 3 days ago contained a number that should be seared into the mind of every American who drives a car. 14 million barrels per day. That is the volume of crude oil that has been removed from global supply by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the production cuts that Gulf states have been forced to make because they cannot export through their primary route. Global oil consumption is approximately 100 million barrels per day. 14 million barrels is 14% of total global supply, removed in a matter of days. The United States has increased production. Latin America has increased production. Non-OPEC producers worldwide have pushed output higher. But the combined increase from all of those sources does not come close to replacing 14 million barrels per day. CNN documented that approximately 8 million barrels of the gap has been filled by increased production elsewhere and by demand destruction, meaning that some consumers around the world have simply stopped using oil because they cannot get it or cannot afford it. In India, LPG consumption, which is the primary cooking fuel for hundreds of millions of households, has fallen 13% according to JP Morgan. Not because Indians want to cook less, because the fuel is physically unavailable. The Philippines declared a state of national energy emergency on March 24th, with enough crude supply to last only until June 30th. Sri Lanka introduced a 4-day working week. Australia activated emergency fuel standards, allowing refineries to produce and sell gasoline with higher sulfur levels. Myanmar restricted private vehicle use to alternate days. These are not hypothetical scenarios being modeled by think tanks. These are real-time government actions being taken right now by countries around the world because the oil is not there. And the remaining 6 million barrel per day gap. The difference between what has been replaced and what was lost is being absorbed by drawing down inventories and strategic reserves, which is exactly why American inventories plunged 6.2 million barrels in a single week, and why the SPR is at its lowest level since 1984. The buffer is being consumed, and when the buffer runs out, the supply crunch that CNN warned is coming will arrive in the United States with the same force that it has already arrived in the Philippines, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and parts of India. The only question is when, and CNN's analysis uncovered something that makes the timing question even more disturbing. Despite the 14 million barrel per day shortfall, despite the Strait closure, despite the global scramble for supply, oil prices have not risen as high as the supply-demand fundamentals would suggest. Brent crude is at $95 to $100, but the magnitude of the supply disruption should, according to classical economics, have pushed prices far higher. CNN investigated why the math does not math and found that approximately 11% of open interest crude oil contracts are held by speculative traders who are betting on prices falling. Those speculators are suppressing the price by flooding the futures market with short positions, betting that the crisis will resolve and prices will drop. When those bets unwind, and they will unwind the moment the market concludes that the Strait is not reopening quickly, the price of oil will spike violently as the speculative ceiling is removed and the physical supply reality reasserts itself. An energy analyst quoted by CNN said there is a global supply crunch coming, and it is not being fully priced in. That sentence means the current price of oil, and therefore the current price of gasoline, is artificially low relative to the actual state of supply. It means the $4.45 you are paying today is the discounted price. The real price, the price that reflects the actual supply situation, is higher. And when the market catches up to reality, the jump will not be gradual. It will be a sudden repricing event that could add 50 cents to $1 per gallon to the national average in a matter of days. $5 GasBuddy Memorial Day is not a prediction anymore, it is the trendline. Fox Business reported yesterday that analysts are forecasting $5 per gallon gas by Memorial Day. That is 24 days from today. The national average is $4.45. It needs to rise 55 cents in 24 days to hit $5. That is 2.3 cents per day. The average has been rising at approximately 3 to 4 cents per day during the recent surge. At the current rate of increase, $5 per gallon gas arrives before Memorial Day, not on it. And the Memorial Day weekend is the unofficial start of the summer driving season, when American gasoline demand jumps to its annual peak. The last time the national average hit $5 per gallon was in June 2022, during the post-Ukraine invasion energy shock. At that time, the Strait of Hormuz was fully open. The SPR held approximately 500 million barrels, and refinery capacity was higher than it is today. In 2026, the Strait is blocked. The SPR holds 403 million barrels and falling. Refinery capacity is lower, crude inventories are plunging. And the war that caused the crisis shows no sign of resolution. The conditions that produced $5 gas in 2022 were temporary and resolved within months. The conditions that are producing $5 gas in 2026 are structural and will persist for the duration of the Hormuz closure, and potentially for months or years afterward, while damaged infrastructure is rebuilt and production is restored. And $5 is not the ceiling. In 2022, California reached $6.44 per gallon at the state average. Several stations in Los Angeles exceeded $7. If the Hormuz crisis deepens, if crude oil moves from $95 toward the $125 per barrel level that RSM's chief economist identified as the recession trigger, national average gasoline prices could push past $5.50 and approach $6. California, Hawaii, Washington, Oregon, Nevada, and parts of the Northeast would exceed $7. Rural Americans who drive 40 to 60 miles each way to work and have no public transportation alternative would face monthly fuel costs of $400 to $600 per vehicle. For a two-car household in rural America, that is $800 to $1,200 per month in gasoline alone. More than many of those households pay in rent. The gas pump would become the largest single expense in the monthly budget. Larger than housing, larger than food, larger than health care. And there is no government program, no subsidy, no tax credit, and no policy mechanism that would offset that cost for the 85% of American commuters who drive to work alone in a private vehicle. And the working-class American who earns $18 per hour and drives a 2012 pickup truck that gets 17 miles per gallon is the person who will be devastated first and worst by $5 and $6 gas. That person drives 30 miles each way to work. That is 60 miles per day, 5 days a week, 300 miles per week. At 17 miles per gallon, that is 17.6 gallons per week just for commuting. At $5 per gallon, that is $88 per week. At $6, it is $106 per week. $424 to $530 per month, just to get to and from a job that pays $2,880 per month before taxes. At $6 per gallon, gasoline alone would consume 18% of that worker's gross income. Before taxes, before rent, before food, before insurance, before anything else. And that worker cannot switch to a more fuel-efficient vehicle, because used car prices are up 28% since 2020, and auto loan rates for used cars exceed 11%. They cannot take public transit because 45% of Americans have no access to public transportation, and in rural areas the figure is above 90%. They cannot work remotely because the jobs available to them, construction, warehousing, manufacturing, service, agriculture, are physical presence jobs that cannot be done from a laptop. They are trapped, their income is fixed, their fuel cost is climbing. And the gap between the two is being filled by credit card debt that is already at $1.21 trillion nationally, with an average APR of 22.76%. The gas pump is becoming a debt machine for working-class America. Every fill-up that goes on a credit card at 22% interest is a fill-up that will cost 22% more by the time it is paid off. The interest on the gasoline is more expensive than the gasoline itself. And nobody in Washington is talking about this, because the people making the decisions do not drive pickup trucks 30 miles to work. Diesel is worse than gasoline, and diesel is what actually moves everything you buy. Every conversation about gas prices focuses on what you pay at the pump for your car. Almost no conversation focuses on what you pay at the grocery store, at the hardware store, at the pharmacy, at every retailer in America, because of what trucking companies pay at the pump for diesel. Diesel is the fuel that moves the American economy. Every semi-truck on every interstate, every freight train, every cargo ship entering an American port, every combine and tractor in the agricultural heartland, every construction vehicle on every job site, every delivery van dropping packages at your door, every school bus in rural America. When diesel prices rise, the cost of moving everything rises. And the cost of moving everything is built into the price of everything. Diesel prices have risen even faster than gasoline during the Hormuz crisis, because diesel is a distillate product that is more directly connected to crude oil supply, and because diesel inventories were already at dangerously low levels before the war began. In 2022, U.S. distillate inventories fell to a 70-year low, the lowest since before the interstate highway system existed. The current Hormuz crisis is depleting those already thin inventories further. And the European market for diesel is even tighter than the American market, which means European buyers are competing with American buyers for the same limited supply of distillate fuel from non-Gulf refineries. Shell warned that Europe could face a fuel shortage. EU manufacturers have imposed surcharges of up to 30% on chemicals and steel to offset energy costs. And the trucking companies that move food, medicine, building materials, and consumer goods across America are passing their higher diesel costs directly to their customers, who pass them directly to you. The diesel price increase from the Hormuz crisis is invisibly embedded in the price of every item on every shelf of every store you walk into. You do not see it on a pump display. You see it on a grocery receipt that is $20 higher this week than last week, and you do not know why. Diesel is why. And diesel is not going back to pre-war prices until the Strait is open. The refineries are rebuilt, the inventories are restocked, and the global supply chain has been re-established. S&P Global says that process takes until 2027 in the best case. In the worst case, nobody has put a timeline on it because nobody knows. Panic buying has already started around the world, and when it starts in America, the shortages become real. The 2026 Iran War Fuel Crisis Wikipedia page, which is being updated in real time as events unfold, documents that much of the world has been affected by panic buying and severe disruption to the distribution of petroleum products. India experienced long queues at petrol stations, driven partly by unfounded panic about shortages. Australia's fuel reserves dropped as a large proportion was released to support retailers in regional areas. And authorities warned that the Liquid Fuel Emergency Act of 1984 could be triggered, which would allow formal rationing. The Philippines declared a national energy emergency. Nepal began filling only half of consumer LPG cylinders. Myanmar restricted driving to alternate days. Sri Lanka moved to a 4-day work week. Thailand, which imports 57% of its oil from the Middle East, has been severely impacted. And the United States has so far remained remarkably insulated compared to the rest of the world, because American domestic production covers a larger share of consumption, because the SPR releases have supplemented supply, and because inventories built up during the pre-war period have acted as shock absorbers. CNN's reporting 3 days ago specifically noted that the United States has proven remarkably insulated from the supply shortages happening around the world, with gas prices high but not as bad as they could be. But the same CNN report warned that the inventories that have worked like shock absorbers are dwindling and fast. That insulation is temporary. It is being consumed week by week as inventories decline and strategic reserves are drawn down. And when American consumers begin to perceive that gasoline could actually become physically unavailable, not just expensive but unavailable, the behavioral response is panic buying. And panic buying in a fuel market with zero slack creates the exact shortage it fears. Every gas station in America holds approximately 10,000 to 20,000 gallons of gasoline at any given time. That supply is replenished by tanker truck on a schedule calibrated to normal demand patterns. When demand surges 50 to 100% in a panic event, the supply runs out before the next delivery. The station puts up a sign that says no gas. The drivers who see that sign drive to the next station. The next station is overwhelmed, the cascade spreads. And within 48 to 72 hours of a panic buying event in a major metropolitan area, hundreds of stations can run dry simultaneously. We saw this happen in May 2021, when the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack shut down the largest refined product pipeline in America for 6 days. Stations from Virginia to Florida ran dry within 48 hours. Not because the fuel supply was gone, because the panic created a demand surge that overwhelmed the distribution system. The same psychology will activate the moment Americans see news footage of gas lines in any major city. And the conditions for that trigger are closer than they have been at any point since the pipeline attack. One more refinery outage, one more spike in crude prices. One more failed diplomatic round, one headline that says gasoline shortage in a major market. And the panic begins. And once it begins, the shortage it creates is real, self-reinforcing, and extremely difficult to stop. And the conditions in 2026 are worse than 2021 in every measurable dimension. In 2021, the pipeline attack was a localized disruption affecting one region. In 2026, the supply disruption is global, affecting every country on Earth that imports oil from the Gulf. In 2021, the SPR held over 600 million barrels. In 2026, it holds 403 million and falling. In 2021, crude oil was approximately $65 per barrel. In 2026, it is $95 to $100. In 2021, inflation was 5% and climbing. In 2026, it is 3.3% and accelerating with a war-driven energy component that has not yet fully priced through. In 2021, the Federal Reserve had tools to respond. In 2026, the Fed is paralyzed between inflation and recession. In 2021, consumer sentiment was recovering from the pandemic. In 2026, consumer sentiment is at an all-time record low. Every single buffer that existed in 2021 has been depleted or degraded by 2026. And the scale of the underlying disruption is orders of magnitude larger. The Colonial Pipeline attack removed 2.5 million barrels per day from one regional distribution system for 6 days. The Strait of Hormuz closure removed 14 million barrels per day from the global supply system, and has been in effect for over 2 months with no resolution. The pipeline attack was caused by a criminal gang that was paid a ransom and turned the pipeline back on. The Strait of Hormuz is closed by a nation-state that is at war and has no incentive to reopen it without concessions that the United States has refused to make. The pipeline was fixed in 6 days. The strait may not be fully functional for months or years. And the American public's tolerance for high gas prices is not infinite. At some point, the anxiety tips into action. At some point, the action becomes hoarding. At some point, the hoarding becomes a shortage. And that point is closer than it has been at any moment in the past 50 years of American energy history.